Hey, hello and welcome here to a new Houdini tutorial. Today I want to show you some interesting basic concepts how you can render light geometry with particles in Redshift and make a nice wonderful light bug scene with the Quixel suit. So let's get started. Right at the beginning we take a look here at our assets. And you need to make sure that your Megascan plugin is active. And we go to Redshift Material, and we click here on our asset we want to export to Houdini in 8K resolution and with the assigned textures. So you hit the plus button here. Then you go to Houdini, and there we have our first castle wall. So that's nothing too special. The textures are already assigned in our material network here, and we can then pretty much have a look at the material assets. Hit L on the keyboard to lay out your scene here, and we have the albedo, the roughness, the displacement, and the normal. And we will make a little castle wall now to where we later on add some light bugs to. So we hit this castle wall here, we press Ctrl Z, Ctrl V to copy, and then we can pretty much just make this a little bit more attached together here. It's nothing too fancy in this tutorial, but you will see how you can use a nice particle system to make those illuminating light bugs. Alright, so then we gonna take this one, and this is our castle wall number 2. We going to assign this here also in our scene. Nothing too fancy, but we will make a camera, and the camera you can make here with a new camera button. Hit the lock to lock your view, and make sure that we gonna also rotate this a bit to give it a bit more depth. Okay, so, and last but not least, we want to make and take a little wall that has some cool details in the scene. So we take this castle wall here, hit plus, put it to the scene, and that's pretty much it for our castle wall here. So we put this over here, also make a quick rotation, adjust it over, and this is pretty much our screen where we want to make those little bugs fly around. So first I'm gonna take a view that is kind of interesting for the further approach. So this one I'm gonna scale up a bit, okay? And the idea is that our wall is emitting particles, and those particles act as lights on the surface of our castle wall here. So we will add this a bit more in this direction, okay? So we're gonna need an emitter, so we're gonna create a grid. We put the grid to 90 degrees, pretty much in this direction here. So we make minus 90. Right. So this grid now, we gonna make it fairly adjusted to our castle wall here, so that we can later on emit some particles from that emitter. So I'm gonna add an edit node. With the edit node, I go on to the top view, and in the top view we make sure that we can select the points of our emitter here to adjust it to the same direction our wall is pretty much showing. So like this. It's important that the emitter is close to the wall, so everything then will reflect on the wall with the different light settings I will show you in a minute. Alright, so let's see how this looks through the camera. And we can see it's interpenetrating. This is something we want to adjust, like something like this. Okay, it's pretty much there. So then we're gonna pick this stone here, make it a bit more aligned to our emitter. And now we will make the little light bugs. So to do this, we're gonna need a DOP network. DOPs are the dynamic operators in Houdini, where you can simulate all kind of particle systems, RBD systems, fluids and explosions, and all it gives us here is an output node. So we need here a POP for particle operator, a POP object. This one this one defines physical attributes of our particle simulation and creation frame when the simulation is started. And we're gonna need a POP POP source. We need a POP source here to source from our sub level, which is the grid here. So we go on this little button there, we hit grid, and what I forgot was to put a null on the end of our tree here. Nothing too special, it's more a basic tutorial. So we go to out emitter, set the flag there, and now in our .NET we can pick this null, which defines the end. And what else we gonna need? We need, of course, a POP solver. And here we have the object, and here we have the input for the sources. And when we hit here, we also can add gravity, but as we deal with little insects here, we actually don't need gravity that much. So in our pop source, we want to make those particles on all points, and we want to use parameter values. And let's have a look at our particles in the display options. So it's pretty small, we make it a little bit larger. And here you can see the amount of particles is way too high. So we go to the birth tab. We want to emit them at the first frame, so we enter $equal $f equal 1, and for the source we have to scatter on the surface to also access impulse count and constant activation, and we set the constant birth rate to 0 and the impulse count to maybe 35. And then we can see, okay, we have on the first frame 35 particles here, and they do pretty much nothing, because in the attributes we have no velocity at the moment. So we add inherited velocity and they start to swirl. I put down the inherited velocity to a smaller value, and it's still too fast. So let's see, still a lot too fast for our light bugs. And we want to make this variance, we want to set initial velocity. So with a variance of 0.1 in all three axes, we get a pretty cool swirling behavior. We can then put the velocity back to a higher value, and the variance also 2. Let's take 3 for all axes, and then you can see that it's swirling slower. So what's also possible is to add in some pop forces that change the behavior of our particles. So we can use the pop steer wonder. We need a merge node to merge our forces in here, and you can see they are now flying away very fast. That's because the settings here are way too high for our little particles. So let's do something like swirl size, a bit pulse length. Then we can add some pop drag, also to slower the motion down and make them them more fancy. Okay, you also could use a pop warp to add a curl noise or turbulence noise, but for the time being, I think this is something we can work with. So at the moment, we go to the output, and now we need to make those particles be visible for our Redshift renderer. To do that, we need a DOP. We need a geometry node. And in this geometry node, we're gonna make a DOP import, which helps us to go from the simulation stage to the geometry stage. And we pick our DOPNet in the DOP network. And for the mask, we pick the pop object. And we need to fetch from DOP network. Now you can see that we are able to see that our particles can be attached, for example, to a sphere. So we take a primitive polygon mesh and we take a copy to points. With the copy to points node, we can pick here the geometry. We want the sphere and our particles, and they are way too large, so we're gonna bring them down to something like 0.3. And you can instance, for example, also your own geometry when you want to make something swirl, like flies or this light bugs or hornets or mosquitoes or stuff like that. So this is something that we now can also add a material to. Want to add a material here, and we're gonna assign a shop network for shader operator, which helps us to texture our particles. So we now hit Redshift material, and for this little presentation I'm using tinted glass. We make it something like orange, bright orange. Okay, and it's important that we put down the reflection, the refraction. The subsurface scattering is not so important, but what is making our particles glow now is here the overall emission. So in the emission we choose the color we want to emit from those particles. So it's something like this, orange, brighter orange. And with the weight we want to make them glow point-wise very strong. So I go back to my material here, go to the shop network we created, and I assign the material. So now we have this assigned, and let's see how this is looking. So I make now a Redshift dome light, and in the light setting I want a texture to use an HDR. And I take a castle map, and here's a rendering of our scene in Redshift, and you can see that we get those little spots here of light, and those particles are swirling around the wall and make everything illuminated. And the interesting thing is that when you would render this, you would get pretty blotchy and blurred artifacts, so it's important that you crank up the values of your min and max rate for the sampling. So the settings are in the main. So in the new Redshift version there is automatic sampling assigned already. In the unified sampling we turn that off, and here we have our min and max samples, and they are pretty low at the moment, so I crank them up to 64 and 128, and let's see now how this rendering is looking. And as you can see, it's only illuminated by a very low value of our HDRI and our light bugs with the emitter material. And you can very flexible change, for example, the amount of our bugs here in the pop source with the impulse count. Let's do that 100. You can very fast change the object that is instanced to the particle through the DOP import node, and I think that is something pretty basic, but for somebody who has never touched Houdini, you can see how flexible this is, pretty much doing the work and the procedural approach. And it's a lot of fun to build up those systems. And let's have a look here at our scene. The emitter is here, and we have the bugs, and this needs to be turned off, and you can see that they are swirling here around and doing its thing and illuminating the scene in a dark November night. So you can, even for lighting a scene, that is something that maybe is handy for somebody. So always make sure that your grid is showing close to the surface. Now at the moment they are flying too far away, but right in the beginning they have a pretty interesting little swirling amount. And you can play with the scene file on my Patreon page, and you can also add in here different other particle operators like the windy, and I think this is it now for this tutorial. I hope you learned something. It was nice to present this little scene to you, and see you next time. Have a great time. Stay safe and healthy. Bye bye.